Hey, I'm Priya and welcome to 𝗂𝗶𝗀𝗃 podcast. Today we are talking about cloud spending without putting you to sleep. Today's episode is about a surprising stat. 80% miss their AI bill, we don't know how, which is a code for everybody's bleeding money and blaming it on AI. Today, I am joined by Gaurav, who has spent the last decade optimizing cloud infrastructure across Fortune 500 companies.
Thanks, Priya, for having me over here, and excited to talk about FinOps, excited to talk about cost optimization. So I hope this conversation helps us, helps the viewers as well.
So let's get into this, Gaurav.
Right.
When you look at the data on AI spending, what's the first pattern you notice?
The first pattern I would say isn't the visibility, it's actually the velocity. So the companies, I would say, have an understanding as to that they are spending, but what they lack in understanding is that why is it compounding so quickly? And one of the reasons is that AI doesn't scale linearly as compared to the traditional cloud. So the cost elasticity is quite substantial in such a scenario.
Can you unpack that for us? What do you mean by cost elasticity in this context?
So traditionally, as I said, cloud scales linearly, right? Well, AI scales differently. So a single GPU, I have the stats over here, single GPU for an hour will cost up to $5 to $15, okay? And if we scale it up, running a transformer training job and other stuff on that cluster of GPU, it will cost up to around $500 to $1,500 per hour, right? And most of the teams are not considering this in their real-time scenario. So this sort of a situation is something that, lacks.
Which brings us to a central tension. AI is strategic, it's worth the investment. But if the spending is invisible until the bill arrives, how does the finance and engineering teams get the informed decisions?
You see, that is one of the core issues over here that the multiple organizations, multiple teams are facing. They are not considering cost as a part of a discipline while designing the architecture, right? They generally go and start analyzing the cost after the architecture has been deployed, architecture has been designed, the work has been started. So that is one of the malpractice, I would say, within the industry. To give you an example, in one of the scenarios where I was working for one of the clients, wherein the LLM cost that they had predicted for fine tuning, the prediction was up to $8,000 to $9,000, right?
Okay.
After it went live, the cost we got was $87,000. So that much amount of misunderstanding or malpractice, I would say, wherein, and malpractice being a very heavy word, I would still sort of resort to it using that word, because people are not understanding how important cost is while designing any sort of architecture, and then they end up making mistakes like that where the estimation is somewhere around $8,000 to $10,000 and the bill that they are getting is somewhere around $85,000 to $90,000.
Well, that's a huge difference. What drove that gap?
So to answer your question, I would say there are maybe, to break it down, there are three factors over here. Firstly, they didn't model the data pipeline cost, moving training data to GPU clusters, right? So that wasn't properly mapped. Secondly, over provisioning the instances. When I say over provisioning, in simple words, I would say if the workload requires a certain amount of instance, certain amount of server, organizations end up assigning or allocating heavier amount of servers, right? So that, in simple words, would be over provisioning the instances. The third, they ran multiple experimental training on their models parallelly, which sort of led to lack of tracking, I would say, in simple words. So the tracking was horrible, and that eventually led to a heavier cost. So it's not that in cloud the pricing is opaque, it's not like that. It's just that the teams or the organizations, they don't understand the scenario before they commit to it. So they will commit to it and then they'll get to know, okay, they have made a mistake. So that is a kind of a situation which is happening or practiced a lot within the industry.
And that's where the 80% forecast gap comes from.
Exactly. And see, to look at this from a different perspective, if 80% of the companies miss by 25% or more, then we cannot just call it a mistake, right? It's a structural problem over here. And the problem, when I say structural problem, the problem I'm hinting towards is the cost. They are not considering the cost while designing the architecture, while designing the infrastructure, while designing the engineering workflow per se. So yeah, it's a deteriorating situation for a scenario like this.
So the solution isn't the forecasting tools, it's changing how teams design.
Exactly. And that's exactly where FinOps comes into the picture. So FinOps is not some sort of a tool. FinOps is not some sort of a application that helps you. It's more of a approach. It's an approach that organizations should follow, and it's just embedding cost accountability while designing the architecture, right? So you consider the factor of costing while you're sitting with your team and designing the infrastructure with them, not after the architecture has been deployed. So yeah, and as you said, it's correct. This is exactly what FinOps is all about.
Well, as you mentioned FinOps, and I should note that 78% of FinOps practices now report into the CTO and CIO organizations and not the finance. That's meaningful structural shift. What changed?
So two things. First, cost became a technical problem. It wasn't a financial one anymore. Secondly, companies realized that the margin impact of the cloud spend is significant to the is significant to warranting the engineering discipline as well. So when FinOps, how do I say it in simpler words? So when FinOps was a finance function, it operated on the downstream of the auditing bills, right? And when it moved under CTO, it became upstream designing for efficiency from the start itself. So yeah, this is exactly where things changed. Finances were included into the technicality of designing the architecture, technicality of designing the infrastructure, and cost became a factor that was included right from the start.
Can you give us a concrete difference? How does the upstream approach looks like?
So the simplest way would be, instead of asking why are we spending a certain amount of money on AI, or why did we spend a certain amount of money on AI, let me break it down in a more simpler manner. What happens generally at the month-end review meeting? Someone comes with a paper, throws the paper on the table and asks a question saying, why did we spend maybe $500,000 on AI? And the teams have to answer that, right? The problem over here is you're asking the questions a bit too late. The money has already been spent. Instead of that, ask the questions right at the inception, as I said, right at the start. Include cost as a part of your designing perception as well. So when you're planning to build an architecture, when you're planning to build an infrastructure, these questions should be asked right away. How much will this cost? Why is this going to cost this much? How can we optimize the performance? How can we work along with it? And stuff like that. So you can cover a lot of pillars while asking the questions right at the start. So basically the teams implementing this effectively are generally small, right? And it's not just one single team doing it. It's actually the kind of discussion that has been spread across engineers and the leaders as well. So it's not centralized cost cutting, it's actually distributed enablement.
That sounds lean, but definitely needs a lot of coordination.
Definitely. I mean, it does. It actually does. But the alternative to all of this is reactive cost management, which is, I personally think, is not going to work that well.
Now, let's shift to the infrastructure strategy. We are seeing 90% of the enterprises adopt hybrid cloud by 2027. That used to be a transitional state, a runway toward full cloud adoption. Now is deliberate architecture. Why is the shift?
That's actually a great question. And to answer this, I would break it down into two factors: GPU availability and cost variability. So I have certain stats over here. public GPUs, I would say to start with, public GPUs are in high demand, okay? But at the same time, they are very expensive. So a single H100 costs hyperscales 15,000 per unit. And when I say 15,000, I mean 15,000 per dollar. So a single H1 costs the hyperscales $15,000 per unit. And that cost gets passed to the customers.
Right.
Meanwhile, organizations can provision their GPU on local infrastructure at roughly 40 to 50% of that same cost, right? Of the same public cloud rates, right? So hybrid in a situation like this has become quite rational.
But isn't it very complex? Now you are maintaining two different environments.
Yeah, but modern orchestration can handle it, I would say. I mean, on paper it does sound complex, but we do have solutions to it. Modern orchestration can definitely handle it. For example, Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes native tooling manages workload placements, right, across hybrid environments. So that is very helpful. The abstraction layer handles whether compute runs on on-prem or cloud. So, as I said, orchestration will help in a complexity like this.
And how do FinOps team track cost across hybrid environments?
In a scenario like this, to answer your question, in a scenario like this is exactly where focus comes into the picture. So focus is nothing but FinOps, open cost, and usage specification, right? So it is a standardized format for cost data. So what happens is, instead of 3 different cloud reporting your billings to you, you have one single unified visibility for all of this,
Right.
okay? Plus propriety on on-prem data, you get one unified model, right? So it's cloud, be it multiple cloud providers that any organization is using, or be it their on-prem infrastructure, you get one single unified view on all of this. Adoption of all this is still climbing. It's, I would say, somewhere up to 55 to 57%. And I'm pretty sure it is only going to grow. It will only grow in coming 10 to 14 months. So it's something that people are adopting. It's something that it is becoming an industry standard.
And what about multi-cloud? Like, is it similar to hybrid or different?
Different drivers, but similar outcome over here. So multi-cloud happens for workload optimization, wherein when I say workload optimization, I'm saying that an organization will decide on the basis of their workload which needs to be deployed in which kind of service provider. When I say service provider, I mean cloud, right? So it comes down to workload optimization, it comes down to data residency, it comes down to compliance, it comes down to vendors. And in all of this, AWS currently shares around 28%, whereas Azure is somewhere around 19 to 21%, I would say. And GCP is again somewhere between 15 to 17%. But yeah, most of the enterprises are going to share 2 or 3 of the names I just mentioned.
And what about cost implications?
Well, around 40 to 45% of the organizations suffer from cost issues despite having the visibility, right? So multi-cloud compounds that problem because you are comparing 3 different billing models, different billing structures, different reporting standards as well.
So hybrid is cost driven, whereas multi-cloud creates governance challenges.
Right, yeah. Hybrid is an optimization, I would say. Multi-cloud is often strategic, but requires very deep and very matured understanding of cost governance.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, because what will happen is if one doesn't have that much amount of maturity and understanding, the bills are going to blast. It's going to be heavy on the pocket. So the governance and maturity is very important to avoid that expense, to avoid those expenses.
Okay, well, now I would like to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. 1/3 of cloud budgets goes to waste despite mature tooling. 21% of infrastructure spend is unused or underutilized. That's $44.5 billion globally in wasted capacity. If tooling exists, why haven't organizations solved this?
That's a good question, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people are asking that same questions within their teams, within their organizations. How do I say it? Cost optimization is not a one-time activity. So a lot of people, I'm guessing, and I have, in my experience, I've seen that when infrastructure is deployed, architecture is deployed, they work on cost optimization and then they forget it. Whereas it shouldn't be like that. It needs to be continuous and it needs to be carried out like that, right? Cost optimization requires assessment, say for example, right sizing of the instances, as I said, say for example, certain instances which have been created but have not been tracked properly. Even those instances are going to be heavy on your bills. So I think this is that practice which a lot of teams, a lot of organizations lack.
So it's people's problem and not the technology, right?
Yeah, largely, yeah, it is definitely a people problem. So organizations that treat cost as a design principles, where engineers care about efficiency, they care about security or performance, they see that, utilization on paper, they see that 30 to 40% of utilization on more than their peers.
And what about the organizations that haven't made this cultural shift yet?
Well, they are losing money left, right and center, I would say. Definitely losing money left, right and center. But the good news is that ROI is significant. So if you're inculcating these practices within your organization, the ROI is very much significant. So when done correctly, in my experience, the ROI was somewhere around $3.5 to $4 on your investment. So every dollar that you invested, you were getting around $3 to $4 in return. So, that just suggests that the gap between the ones who are practicing these things and the ones who aren't is pretty much very high.
Well, let me surface another data point. 40% of the companies now spend over $10 million annually on AI infrastructure alone. That's not experimental budget, that's production scale. How did that number grow so quickly?
Well, I mean, if you're specifically talking about AI was like a lot of organizations started adopting AI, say for example, 2 to 4 years back, right? And even in that scenario, they were majorly working towards exploration of AI and on POCs. So going by that angle, the cost was pretty much less, right?
Right.
But once the exploration was done, once the POCs were done, then comes the part which was miscalculated. When these same things went on production, the bills increased very heavily. And that was something people did not see that coming, multiple models being run parallelly, multiple workflows being run parallelly. And at the same time, the GPU, which generally costs so intensively, was being used heavily as well. So that was another factor that came into the billing situation. And on top of that, a single inference cluster for a moderately complex LLM is going to cost around somewhere $2.5 million annually, right? And on top of that, you have to fine tune it, you have to do experimentation, you have to work on secondary models, and you're at, from 2.5, you're directly at skyrocketing towards $10 million annually.
Right. And the forecast error is particularly acute here because the costs are new and the patterns are unfamiliar.
Exactly. Because also the historical data is insufficient. You cannot just work on monitoring and observability just on the basis of insufficient historical data. So the forecasting is not going to be accurate. And on top of that, they don't know how to model a pipeline properly, right? So the understanding the GPU utilization patterns, understanding the overhead of multi-model infrastructure, that is not proper. So the forecasting is always going to be inaccurate. So if you are going to rely on forecasting completely, it is not going to help.
You mentioned industrial GPU costs earlier $10,000 to $30,000 per unit. At enterprise scale, that's a significant capital.
Exactly, and what's happening is most organizations are not allocating their GPUs properly. As I mentioned, over provisioning of instances is the same situation over here. They buy more than they need, which is going to cost them a lot, right? So their assessment is not proper. They are utilizing the GPUs, which are supposed to be utilized properly, are not being utilized to their peak, and which basically is not, the reasons are not justifiable, because you're spending a lot, but there's no proper justification to the spendings that you're doing right now. So that is something that I have been seeing a lot happening within the organizations and different industries here.
So the prescription is measurement and not the provisioning.
Yes. Model the workload, right? Forecast the cost, validate the utilization assumptions. So all of these practices are very important. And then comes the provisioning. So whatever I said right now is just the part of the assessment. You have to model the workload. You have to justify whatever you're about to spend. Too many organizations I have seen that I've worked with, they have skipped these steps. They haven't done the assessment properly.
Okay, now I want to address the tension here. AI is clearly valuable. Companies pursuing it strategically are seeing EBITDA uplift to 20 to 30% by 2030. But getting the economics wrong early can erode those gains. How do you balance strategic investment with fiscal discipline?
Well, it's the same way you do with any significant infrastructure decision, right? So you measure the outcomes alongside the costs. So basically what I'm trying to say over here is, you ask questions like, what revenue margin impact does this technology have, right? So if it's appropriate, only then you sort of step into it. If it's not going to give you enough returns, regardless of how new or how efficient or how widely used this technology is, if it's not going to give you any sort of return, you can sort of step away from it for a while. Just wait for the time being. If it's very important, only then you take this or any sort of technology and adopt it within your organization.
Well, that requires a lot of alignment between product leadership, engineering, and finance.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I've been talking about. That's exactly where the maturity comes into the picture, right? So it's not just about, this is a financial problem, it's not an engineering problem. Right now, everyone needs to sit together, especially the technical team, especially the financial team should come together, have a discussion, have a collaboration, and only accordingly, as per the discussion, move ahead with the plan. And the ones who are adopting this collaborative approach, I'm pretty sure they are surprised by the optimization of their cost. But the ones who are not are still like they're bleeding money left, right, and center.
Well, as we have identified the problems now, can you please tell us what companies are doing right?
So the ones who are doing it right are, as I said, integrating cost as a factor from the start itself, right? So the costs are not being calculated at the month-end review or the quarterly review. They are involving cost as a factor while architecting their infrastructure, which actually helps in attaining the governance, the FinOps governance at a very early stage. If any organization manages to do that, they'll definitely see the changes in their costing, they'll definitely see the changes in their billings. So, and I'm not saying it's just a simple thing that you just take it and you adopt. Of course, there are multiple frameworks. You have to understand those frameworks. You have to understand how those frameworks can be made flexible according to your organization. But it definitely is a mandate where this collaboration should happen. This understanding of those frameworks, those assessments, that discipline should be brought into the picture within the organization. And I'm pretty sure if anyone who does it correctly, accurately, and rightly, they'll see the difference in their bills.
Right. And what should be the timeline from moving from cost is a problem to cost is managed?
Yeah, on and off, maybe I would say round about 3 to 6 months. if the leadership is aligned, if the efforts are put in the right direction, then I would say 3 to 6 months seamlessly. And but then again, if you are retrofitting it onto existing infrastructure, that is going to take a longer amount of time, right? As I said, the frameworks needs to be understood and utilized very flexibly. The variable over here is the organization's willingness, right? Is the willingness to make cost as a design constraint, right? And not as a post ad hoc concern. It needs to be a design constraint. Only then it will work seamlessly and it can be achieved within a less amount of time.
Right. And for the organizations listening to this who recognizes themselves in the problem, 80% forecast miss, margin erosion, unclear AI spend, what should be the entry point?
Audit, a FinOps audit, right? One should not just sit and guess. Everything needs to be audited. What it will do is it will help in understanding the loopholes, the mistakes, the lack of understanding that the organizations, those different teams have been making, right? Once they understand those loopholes, once that entire blueprint has been laid out, they can make the changes to the architecture, they can make the changes to the practices that they have been integrating within the team, within the organization. And once those changes are brought into the picture, then it's a completely different scenario. So basically, on paper it doesn't sound that exciting, but trust me, like once the results have been achieved, the excitement will be there.
And from a tooling perspective, do organizations need to replace their existing infrastructure monitoring, or this is more about governance and process?
Largely, yes, it's a governance and process scenario, but yeah, the tooling exists. So, see, most of the organizations have visibility into their cost, but they are not able to solve the problem, right? And it's not because, because they haven't been trying. It's the discipline that they lack. They need to understand the framework, they need to understand the discipline, they need to understand cost as a constraint in the infrastructure. But then again, that is exactly where we come into the picture, right? 5x3 comes into the picture over here. We do provide FinOps and FinOps discipline, FinOps at scale. We provide governance, we provide agentic AI automation, we provide cloud optimization, and we understand that, we assess everything properly and we bring all of those into practice and not just in theory.
Well, as you mentioned agentic AI, that's interesting. Given that we are trying to manage AI cost, aren't we risking adding cost to solve a cost problem?
Again, a question that has been heavily asked, but see, this is how I look at it. If it's applied correctly, it will work well. So if you're saying that if I'm adding my agents or more agents to the infrastructure, it is going to cost more. But if it is applied correctly, if those agents are going to do their work well, yes, you will be paying the cost for that agent, but that agent is going to help you decrease a cost to a very higher degree, right? So that is going to help.
Okay, well, that feels like a conceptual bridge between the problems that we have identified and the solutions.
Right, and it is actually, right? Organizations cannot manually track and optimize AI, especially at scale. They cannot just manually track and optimize it. They need automation of some sort to help all of this work out very well. But that automation needs to be intelligent. It shouldn't just be blind. It needs to be intelligent. It needs to be governed. Only and only then you will get the returns properly.
Well, Gaurav, let me ask you to close this with a perspective. If you are speaking to a CTO or a CFO who has just realized that their AI spend is out of control, what would you tell them?
Well, first of all, I would just tell them that this is not a failure, okay? It's not like they are all alone in this. Secondly, I would tell them that, I would give them that sort of motivation where I would tell them that this definitely can be resolved. It's not like a problem which is impossible to be solved. It needs a certain kind of assessment, understanding, but it definitely is solvable. Third, instead of assessing it every quarter, assessing their cost every quarter, I think it needs to be a continuous process. It needs to be a discipline that is continuously tracked, continuously practiced, and only then it will work. And fourth would be bringing cost into engineering and engineering into cost, by which I basically mean good amount of collaboration between the two teams. And lastly, measure everything, assess everything, optimize what you feel can be optimized. Just don't keep it to visibility, just don't rely on visibility. There needs to be that assessment every now and then. So these would be my 5 pointers to any CTO who would come and ask me, about this situation.
Well, thanks a lot, Gaurav. And for listeners who want to explore more about this, can further visit our website 𝗫𝗁.com. We have published FinOps frameworks, AI governance models, and case studies on cloud optimization. For everyone listening, if your cloud bill surprised you last month, that's data. Use it.